this week saw a series of arrests involving suspects in grand acts of corruption. This includes the infamous Free State asbestos project. These efforts are hailed as a step in the right direction in efforts to combat corruption in the country. Meanwhile, unnamed sources have said more arrests can be expected over the weekend. The week's high-profile arrests will also go a long way to restoring the image of the NPA in the eyes of the public. But do these arrests go far enough? And joining us now to discuss whether the arrests will help indeed restore the public image of the National Prosecuting Authority is former NPA's Asset Forfeiture Unit Head, Willie Hofmeyr. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Certainly, I mean, given the latest arrests, any sign of stability within the NPA is welcome. But are we celebrating too early?
I think it is welcome indeed, and I think many people have become a bit impatient about how long it takes to actually do these arrests. But I think it's important to understand that most of the serious cases of corruption is done in a very organized way by a whole group of people. It's not one individual that you need to get. And so it's important that one does a proper investigation to find out who are the people behind the crime and to make sure that you get to the people at the top, not just pick up the foot soldiers along the way.
And when you talk about the foot soldiers along the way, we saw the arrests this week. Do you think they've gone far enough, or are there still more heads that need to roll here?
I think it seems to have gone quite far. I'm obviously not very familiar with the actual cases, but I do think that there are probably still some more senior people that may be involved in these matters. And it's important that we keep the focus on getting to the people who really organize the corruption.
And let's talk about, of course, the importance of convictions, because that is one of the areas that, South Africans have really been lamenting, to say that there's arrests, but really not enough convictions. How important will convictions be, particularly in these cases that we saw this week?
I think obviously convictions is the first prize, and that is what all of us in law enforcement strive for. But it is a process. Once you've had somebody arrested, there's going to be a criminal trial. There'll be lots of lawyers involved. So it's going to take some time in court before the cases are actually finalized and there are convictions. And even then, they can appeal and stay out of jail for some time afterwards. But I think it's very important that we have started off with a bit of a bang now, and I think there will be a lot more momentum to get these cases finalized.
And besides the latest arrests, what other signals, could South Africans be looking at here in terms of ensuring that the NPA is on the right track?
I think the other parallel process that obviously is happening as well is to ensure that the money that was stolen is recovered. Again, that is not always a very quick process because many of our criminals are quite astute at hiding the money that they've stolen somewhere. So quite a lot of work has to be done to actually trace the money and to recover it for the state.
And let's look at, of course, the NPA. I mean, it is nothing without, its investigative arms. And when you look at, as you say, that some of these cases really take time because, the people are able, those who are masterminding this, are able to hide and cover their tracks, really. How important is it going to be to ensure that it's got the resources that it really needs to carry out, further cases? Because this is just one of those matters that really found itself in the public eye, particularly the asbestos case. But there's a lot more cases that it needs to solve.
Indeed, I think there are literally hundreds of cases that need to be taken on. And I think it is important that as many as possible of those cases should be done. I think that NPA did get some additional budget last year, so it has been able to increase its capacity to do the cases. But I think the sort of top-level skills that you need for these very complicated corruption cases is scarce in the NPA and even in the country as a whole. There are not that many prosecutors who've actually done really big, complex commercial cases. So I think that we do need to support the NPA and the Hawks on the investigative side, but also to have a little bit of patience to ensure that they have time to do the job properly.
Would you say that the organization is well on its way to restoring its credibility?
I definitely think that it has made huge strides in rebuilding its credibility. And, hopefully we can put the misery of the state capture period behind us when the NPA and the Hawks were not really allowed to do any corruption cases. But I think this is, for me, a very good signal of the way forward.
And what kind of support does Advocate Shamila Batoyi need, to fulfill her role?
I think there's a range of support that has come, for example, from organizations like Business Against Crime, that I think has assisted with some of this, helping to provide people who can have some of the skills that may be lacking in the NPA. Generally, the NPA, I think, has good skills, but the problem is once you start doing a large number of cases, which is what we have to do, obviously those skills become a bit thinly distributed. So I do think it's important to look at prosecutors who may now be in the private sector, for instance, and can be persuaded to come back to the state to assist in these cases.
And when of course, we look at corruption, there's been public sector corruption, which a lot of the media has really covered and has been in the spotlight. But certainly, the lens also can be zoomed to private sector corruption. How important is this for, the NPA to also ensure that it does prosecute people in that front, particularly when you look at matters, like Steinhoff, for example?
I think it is true that there has been some very serious private sector corruption cases. But, my own estimate is that it's probably about 80% of the serious corruption cases involve not the private sector in the traditional sense, but looting from state coffers, and often with the collaboration of politicians and powerful people in the state to assist with that looting. And I think that is, for me, where the focus has to be. I think when there is private sector corruption, it needs to be dealt with. But I think that's, for me, not the major problem at the moment.
And as you talk about politicians, it's critical for also the NPA to shed itself off of any political interference, because this has also come into the fore, in the past, when also looking at some of Advocate Shamila Batoyi's predecessors.
Indeed, and I think we've had a very bad history in the NPA for the last 8 years or so, but I think Shamila Batoyi has done an excellent job in getting the NPA together again. But it is still a question of building the capacity of good prosecutors who can take on these very big cases competently, because they're not easy to do. They're very difficult. They're going to take a long time, and you need really skilled people to be able to tackle these cases. That's the biggest challenge, I think.